Cats and kittens, geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and comic fans of all types, all nationalities, all races and creeds, welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon, a forum where you get to ask questions of a seasoned, world-renowned, almost award-winning comic book writer. Because that's what I do, and that's who I am. I'm Chuck Dixon, and you ask me questions about what I do for a living, and what do I do for a living? I write comic books. No, I no longer drive an ice cream truck. Hey, subscribing really helps me out here. So if you hit that subscribe button, it really increases the profile of this channel. We added only maybe 400 subscriptions recently, and I see a definite boost in viewership, a exponential increase in the number of you watching this. So if you hit that subscribe button for me, if you haven't already, it would be most appreciated by all of us, our little community of curious comic book aficionados. Let's start with Aaron Little with a very long question. Well, a long setup and a short question. It's been driving me nuts for a while. In comics and movie, characters undergo rapid transformations in size with no explanation at all about where the extra material is coming from. Prime examples of the Hulk and Captain America's origin. But the same is true for gritty, hard sci-fi horror like the Alien films, where a tiny chestburster grows to over 8 feet in seemingly a half hour, presumably without eating anything. And then, of course, there's Bane. I have absolutely no problem suspending disbelief when it comes to some kind of super accelerated cellular mitosis due to mutation, venom, super soldier serum, alien bioweapons, etc. But even cells gotta eat. This kind of thing happens all the time in comics and film without so much as a quip acknowledging its impossibility, much less any attempt at an actual explanation, which I think could add some interesting complexity if done right. As a logistics guy like yourself and co-creator of Bane, have you thought about this phenomenon? Yeah, the Hulk's kind of hard to explain. You know, he's mild-mannered, Bruce Banner, a panty waist. Stan Lee refers to him over and over again. And he, becomes this, 1,000-pound green beast just by being exposed to gamma rays. I don't know how that works. But remember, the Hulk was created in the atomic age when nobody really thought about how these mutations happened or what the results would be. And pretty much put it down to anything could happen if you were exposed to radiation. Giant ants, giant prehistoric monsters rising from the sea, all kinds of nutty stuff. It could happen. Guys turning invisible, women growing to 50 feet in height. So anything could happen. Now Captain America, remember, he was subject to an experiment, and I'll put it off that he was bombarded with ions of various types that would increase his bulk. Back in the 60s, when the Soviets were shooting men into space, their guys stayed up there a long time because a lot of times they weren't real sure how they were going to get them back down. So you had, and they were always going for orbiting records and endurance records because they were Russians and they were in competition with us. There really was a space race. And what they found was that prolonged exposure to cosmic rays, they don't turn you into Reed Richards, but they do rob calcium from your bones. And so a lot of these astronauts were coming back after long periods in space with weakened bones. And the Soviets came up with an idea of bombarding these astronauts with calcium ions to rebuild their bone structure. And you know what? It worked. It worked. Those commies were onto something. And so I always assumed, when I was reading Cap, because I knew about this stuff in the 60s because they talked about it on the news, I always assumed that's what happened with Cap, that he bulked up with various number of ions. If you read early Marvel comics, read them now, Stan uses a lot of gobbledygook about unstable molecules. That's how he explains things. Because how does Reed Richards expand far beyond his normal bulk? It's unstable molecules. Johnny Storm bursts into flame without actually burning himself up. It's unstable molecules. This is from the guys who created the ultimate nullifier. So you either buy it or you don't, if you know what I mean. Now, Bane is another deal. Anybody who lifts weights or exercises regularly, or well, not regularly, but exercises like a madman, knows that you get bigger. Exercise makes you bigger, more blood flowing to the muscles. I'm not going to go into anything graphic about how this transformation, particularly a man, happens with some regularity. But I didn't have any problem because with Bane getting larger, he probably doesn't get any heavier. He just gets bigger because there's more blood flowing to the muscles. And they are getting, as they say on the street, engorged. So I never had a problem with that happening with Bane. Now, Alien, what's the alien physiognomy? Maybe oxygen makes them get bigger. Maybe they feed on something that we don't know. I mean, no, they haven't eaten anything. I mean, they kill a lot of people. They don't seem to eat anybody. I mean, what does an alien eat? What do they consume? We're left to imagine that they simply consume stuff out of the air. I have no idea. It's never explained. It's just weird. And of course, if we had a real metamorphosis of the alien that made any kind of sense, it would take months. And that would kind of kill the suspense in a movie if you had months to figure out how to kill this thing before it burst out of its cocoon. It doesn't make any sense now, but, perhaps there's something in nature that occurs that quickly. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, beyond a single cell animal, where they could grow in bulk. But even then, they've got to consume something, right? I mean, the blob made perfect sense. As he ate, he got bigger. Eat a diner full of people, you get bigger. You put on a few pounds or tons. So everything he consumed, which was everything, I'm assigning a gender. I misgendered the blob. I'm sorry. I don't know what gender the blob is. There's no evidence that he's of any gender. I'm still referring to it as he. Anyway, it got larger by consuming everything. I mean, a diner, for God's sakes. People, cars, the roadway. It just ate everything in its path. And Blob made more sense than Alien. I'll grant you that. Werewolves, it's supernatural. So we're done with that. That's explained. That's magic. The only one recently, Shapeshifter, that really bothered me was on the series Dirk Gently, the more recent TV series Dirk Gently, which I watched and thoroughly enjoyed. The character of Mona Wilder, who can transform into anything. She can transform into a gun. She can transform into a length of chain. And that didn't really make any sense to me at all. How could she do that? How could she get that small or get that large? How could she become a truck? That really didn't make any sense to me. The show hints around the fact that these mutants or strange characters that show up in the show are more supernatural related rather than mutations, or science sourced. But they never got to do a third season, so we never saw any more explanation of exactly how the hell this stuff was happening on the show. But it is a lot of fun, and they play it lightly, so there's an enormous suspension of disbelief. Check it out if you haven't. Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. It's not based on the Douglas Adams novels. It's inspired by the Douglas Adams novels. R.B. Probst, can you elaborate on the tie-ins to Underworld Unleashed? Did you get to pick the villains you used, or were they editorially mandated? Did you like upgrading an existing villain, Charaxus and somewhat Spellbinder, or did you like creating someone brand new, Tezcatlipoca, and again Spellbinder? I got to create Lady Spellbinder, who I used quite a bit, and apparently I did not know this, appeared in Wonder Woman. and Green Lantern as well. I had no clue until I looked up on the internet looking for images of Lady Spellbinder. The gag was that, if I remember right, we had a Satan stand-in called Neron, and he was going around granting villains their wish to be more powerful. And just like Satan, the Prince of Lies, some of those transformations were unwanted and unpleasant. Lady Spellbinder seemed to enjoy being amped up, as did Spellbinder. And then we had Taraxis, who's poor old killer moth, gets turned into this monstrosity, designed by Flint Henry. I don't think Flint ever drew Taraxis, but this was back in the day when comic books actually made money. They were actually profitable. Imagine that. And so there was some, discretionary funds to pay for model sheets of new characters. And, people like Art Adams and folks like that, Graham Nolan, would get paid to do model sheets for brand new characters who were going to be used extensively. And in this case, Scott Peterson wondered if Flint would like to take a shot at Charaxus, the supernaturally transformed killer moth. And of course he did. And as you can see, he signed it Brundle Flint. That's his little joke. Oh, I don't remember that Tez Catlapoca was... I know he was in those issues of that crossover, whose name I've already forgotten. Underworld Unleashed. Was he part of that? I don't remember. I just remember wanting to create a Jaguar God type character because I wanted to see Rodolfo DiMaggio draw it. And of course, Rodolfo knocks it out of the frickin' park. I mean, a fantastic Were Jaguar. I liked Were Jaguars so much I reintroduced them and used them in Midnight's War, which you can read on ArcTunes. I reintroduced Were Jaguars in a combat sequence which opens my segment of the story that I wrote. So yeah, I don't remember him being amped up. I just, unless he was a villain, I can't remember. I really should go back and reread these stories before I talk about them, but I wrote them. I should be able to remember them, shouldn't I? No, I shouldn't, because I don't remember stories I wrote. I can remember stories other people wrote, but I can't remember ones I wrote because basically those stories are in filing cabinets in my head, and once I get them out of my head, they're gone. Brett Turabini. Let's say DC Studios approached you to pitch an idea for a Superman movie at a name your price and contract cost like $9 million. What would your pitch be? Well, you want it for free? Where's my $9 million? I'll tell you one thing my Superman movie would have. It would open like this. My opening scene would be Superman versus a giant robot. I want to see Superman versus a giant robot. Superman used to fight giant robots all the time. I love the Fleischer cartoon from the 40s. Fights the magnetic monsters. That's how I want it to open. And wouldn't you, in a scene like this, learn everything you need to know about Superman within a few minutes? I mean, you have to use all of his powers and ingenuity and intelligence and caring for the citizens of Metropolis to make sure they don't get stomped to death by some, humongous automaton. And I just think that I don't want to see a Superman movie that doesn't open this way. If you made a Superman movie and you didn't have it open like this or something commensurate to this, I'm just not interested. I could care less. And just move the story on from there. I mean, this would be my, James Bond pre-credit sequence. And then, I would have a story where Metropolis and possibly the entire Earth was under threat. And the only person in the world who could save it was Superman. But of course, there was some obstacle, some challenge, something that even Superman couldn't overcome. And because he's Superman and he's super strong and he's super smart and super principled, he would figure out a way around it. And it's a Superman story. That's the formula. It's a wrestling picture. It's the formula. That's what you're supposed to do. It's not that hard. So get that $9 million together, and I'll give more details. Maybe we could crowdfund it. Imagine if I raised $9 million to write a Superman movie. You know what DC would do? They'd sue me. Christopher R. Taylor in the movie Man of Steel, Superman question. General Zod is as powerful as Superman. The Phantom Zone is not available, and Zod is about to murder a family with heat vision. Superman ends up snapping Zod's neck. Now, putting aside how silly that is, he can break his neck but can't stop it from turning. He can murder Zod but not beat him in a fight. How would you have written that scene showing Superman finding a way to do it without murdering somebody? Man, where's my $9 million? You want me to solve all these problems? You want me to solve all of Superman's cinematic problems, turn back the clock, and fix this character, this classic, iconic, wonderful character? Yeah, I mean, he would just think of another way. He would think of another way. Now, what I would do is I would introduce something early in the story that didn't seem to be a setup, but it would be, and it would provide Superman with the answers he needs to defeat Zod without killing him. I don't know what that would be, but there has to be some Kryptonian technology, something Zod didn't think of. You know how that works. But the secret to something like that is the setup. You got to set it up so it doesn't look like a setup. And there's the heavy lifting. And you got to hope that the director and the actors understand, look, this is a scene that's got to look like just off the cuff, meaningless. It's just a beat getting us from one scene to another, but actually it's very, very important. It's throwing the sled into the fire. It's, not throwing the sled in the fire, but the kid on the sled in the snow and Citizen Kane. Who knew that was a setup? That's a problem I have with current movies. They don't know how to set up and pay off. They set up and you're like, oh, that's a setup. Everybody can see it. We know the language of cinema. You jerks. You make these movies and you don't seem to understand that we understand the language of cinema possibly better than a lot of you people making cinema. We get it. We've learned it. Everybody in the world's learned the language of cinema. And it is a true language. And it's a shared language the world over. And they don't seem to know how to do this stuff. But that would be my Superman movie, principled character, never kill, never resort to murder. Why? Because he's a good guy, he's a moral guy, and he's smart enough to figure a way around it. Any Superman interpretation where he has to kill to save the day that's a stupid Superman. And I don't ever want to see a stupid Superman, and you don't either, any more than any of us want to see a weepy Batman. Jethru Cranley. I hope, I'm going to guess it's Jatru. It's not the TH sound. I don't know your nationality, so I don't know. But you got some awesome questions. You ask here. How greatly does Frank Castle admire Captain America? Well, according to current continuity, not a whole lot. But I would imagine, like most people growing up in Frank Castle's era, he would have been introduced to, he would have remembered Cap's reemergence in the world. And Cap was a very visible character. The world could see, the world got to know and admire and everything else. I would imagine he admired him very much. But, going to Vietnam sort of took the luster off of all that stuff. He become a bit disillusioned. You see the world a different way. And Frank's not, he's not a super soldier. He's not nearly invulnerable and, stamina, to race around all day without ever getting tired. So, but I imagine, Captain America would be an ideal that he felt he outgrew once his family was killed. He was no longer looking at the world the way that Captain America wishes we would all look at the world. Okay, another question from Jatu. What is your favorite Mel Gibson movie? Well, it's Road Warrior. It's probably most people's favorite Mel Gibson movie. It was really my first introduction to Mel. And I just thought he was terrific. And obviously the world thought he was terrific because it made him a cinema superstar almost overnight. Mostly because the film was a huge hit in Japan. Even bigger hit than it was in Australia. And then American distributors said, hey, we want a piece of that. And slapped it on every drive-in screen they could possibly do. And then once we got the home video, it exploded. And Mel was like the #1 box office star for a few years in a row there off of that. But another favorite of mine, and I generally like every Mel Gibson movie, even the bad ones, because he makes the scenes he's in better. He's made a few, geezer teaser movies recently, but he's riveting. He's good, so I'll watch it if Mel's name is above the title. But Get the Gringo. I probably watch this more than Road Warrior, which might make it my favorite Mel Gibson movie, because I watched it more often. I think I've watched this movie every 6 months since I first bought it on Blu-ray. Because for a long time, you couldn't find it anywhere. If you didn't have it on Blu-ray, you just didn't see it. Nobody wanted to run it because it was, controversial. I mean, Mel was controversial. This is his comeback movie after, the drunk driving arrest and the unfortunate remarks he made while being arrested, and then the embarrassing recordings of him and his wife during their divorce, which I got divorced once. I was like, yeah, I probably said a lot of that stuff. Mel said. I was probably that angry. But Get the Gringo is it's a funny movie, and a lot of people, and me included, look upon it as an unofficial sequel to Payback. This is very much the same character that was in Payback. A little older, a little wiser, a little more acerbic. But perfect Mel sense of humor, perfect Mel delivery of lines. I usually don't like off-screen narration, but this stuff's priceless. Absolutely priceless. It's a great movie, worth seeing again and again. Now, a minor film of Mel's that I like, and I really only like it for one scene. You have movies like that where you really like one scene. You'll watch the whole movie just to see that scene. And in Edge of Darkness, terrible things happen to Mel and his young daughter, and someone must pay. And one of the guilty parties is a United States senator who's obviously modeled after John Kerry. Everything about him is John Kerry. And at one point, Ray Winstone shows up to bring justice to this room full of corrupt officials. And he kills everybody except the John Kerry character. And he's obviously about to kill the John Kerry character. And the John Kerry character pleads for his life. It says, I am a United States senator. And that's his defense to not be assassinated. And Ray Winston says, by whose standards? And then blows his brains out. I watched that movie over and over and over again just for that scene. I'm not suggesting that anybody do that to John Kerry, but it's kind of cathartic to see a corrupt official get it. That's true. Again, if you wrote a Hallmark Christmas movie, how would you break up the formula and how many gunfights would you include? Yeah, I'd make The Night the Reindeer Died. Don't we all want to see that movie? I've thought a lot about The Night the Reindeer Died, what I would do. I imagine he would have an elf unit, paramilitary elf unit called the Santa's Slayers. I might be tempted to make an anti-romantic comedy, just flip the formula on its head, like the movie Chilly Scenes of Winter, based on an Ann Beattie novel. And John Hurd and Mary Beth Hurt are two characters in what begins as a normal romantic comedy, except John Hurd just does everything wrong. And in the end, they don't get together because they're really not meant for each other. It's an amazing movie in its performances and everything else. I really like this movie a lot. If you've never seen it, it is a sleeper hit. It used to run endlessly on HBO in the 80s. But it's, it takes a romantic comedy and completely turns it inside out. So that there's no, the happy ending is that Mary Beth Hurt doesn't have to put up with John Hurd anymore. He's really pathetic, but he's really funny as well. I always like John Hurd as an actor, and this is probably his best, certainly his funniest performance. I take a page out of Preston Sturgis's book and just take the normal Hallmark formula, and we all know the Hallmark. If you've seen one of them, you know the plot to all of them. Some big city gal or big city guy goes home for the holidays and runs into, an old flame, and, hijinks ensue. And there's some minor subplots going on about a Christmas tree or decorating the town square or something else, but they're all the same. They're all exactly the same story. One of my sons did production assistant work on a number of these things. I mean, believe it or not, Hallmark comes down to Tampa to film some of these movies, and they make 36 to 40 of these a year. And this is in addition to all the other channels that make Christmas movies. I mean, they literally, if they don't already, should have a 24/7 Christmas movie channel, because I know people who watch these all year long. They don't just watch them at Christmas. So at this point, they've literally probably got 1,000 of these movies, and they're all identical. And it wouldn't be that hard to go in and tear them up and still have the same net result. I mean, there's other plot lines, friends. Yes, it's set at Christmas, but there's other plot lines. Remember the Night, written by Preston Sturges, is a classic Christmas movie. If you haven't seen it, you should. Fred McMurray, Barbara Stanwyck. Fred McMurray is an assistant district attorney. He sentences Barbara Stanwyck, who's a shoplifter. She's shoplifting because she's hungry. She's so hungry she passes out on the street. He sentences her to stay in jail over Christmas, and then feels bad about it, even though he's a hard-hearted guy. Something about her just tugs at his heartstrings. Not in a sentimental way, but just, he just feels bad. Feels like a rat for putting her in prison over Christmas. And so he bails her out. Well, she's kind of ticked off about it because she still doesn't have any money, still doesn't have anything to eat. At least she would get a meal over Christmas. He ends up taking her home with him to Indiana for his annual holiday trip back to Indiana. And, there's, back and forth, the standard love rack stuff. And, eventually, obviously, it's a romantic comedy. They fall in love. But it's an excellent, charming movie full of lots and lots of great character actors. Preston Sturges, he didn't direct it, but he wrote it. But Preston Sturges movies are generally loaded with terrific small performances by an ensemble cast of character actors. I'd also be tempted to write a Christmas story in which a child complicates things in some way. This is a scene from Mr. Scoutmaster, one of the Mr. Belvedere movies that they seem to have made 100 of. I would have a movie in which a child, something about a child, not that they're ill or anything else, but they complicate matters to pull the romantic couple apart, and eventually, of course, because it's a Christmas movie, the child is the one that brings them together. Like, oh, we're already tearing up. What a sappy movie, Chuck. Or a gimmick romantic comedy. And since these are all romantic comedies, I Love You Again, classic William Powell Myrna Loy movie in which William Powell has amnesia. He suffered amnesia for 10 years and has a new personality until he gets hit on the head and remembers that he's actually married to Myrna Loy, which you would want to remember. And he goes back and basically has to reintroduce himself, even though he doesn't remember a lot about their past life. I mean, he's basically told, you're not who you say you are, you're this other guy. And he has to go back and basically try to re-spark his memories, as well as win back the heart of Myrna Loy, who doesn't know where her husband disappeared to for all these years. Set that at Christmas time, or set something like that, some sort of gimmick. Jatru asks again, you've talked about how the Western genre doesn't need to actually take place in the West, and that its core elements, mainly that of a conflict in the story being resolved through violence, are applicable to a number of films in different settings. What would you say that the core elements of the pirate genre are, and how would you say that these elements can be applied to other stories and settings besides that of the high seas? The Western is such a solid framework for a movie. It's man against nature, it's man against man, it's man against himself. And there's all different kinds of Westerns, wilderness Westerns, town Westerns. I went down the list a few videos ago of all the different varieties of Westerns, the revenge Western, all the rest of it. And what they all have in common, except Warlock, is that they all end in violence. They all end in the final shootout. Warlock does not suffer. It's the only Western I can tell you does not suffer from not having a final. Like, you don't want that final shootout to happen. I hope I'm not spoiling it for any. Well, I just did. Pretend I didn't say anything. So yeah, that's what happens. Well, pirate movies aren't that different. Pirate movies generally end in action, some big climactic. Well, let's face it, every movie, if it's an action film, ends with some big climactic action thing, and everything's resolved through that. Be it a car chase or the hero running through the villain's collapsing secret headquarters, or whatever. Lots of explosions and flying bodies. But there's a lot of different kinds of pirate stories. There's the quest for the treasure. There's basically the pirate war story, where it's pirates versus the Spanish, privateers. There's there's just every kind of pirate story you can possibly imagine, but they all have to have action in them, or they're just not interesting. I mean, why would you have these ships and swords and cannons and everything else if you didn't have the boarding parties and broadsides and everything else that we want in a pirate story? But the thing is to bring something fresh to it, humor, some sort of new twist. So it's not the same old pirates story. And as a negative example of that, Cutthroat Island is an absolutely gorgeous pirate movie. It is beautiful. It cost a fortune to make. It basically ruined Rennie Harlin's career. This was his reward for making Die Hard 2, which was enormously successful, but I argue that a chimpanzee could have directed Die Hard 2, and it would have been just as successful, not to take anything away from Rennie Harlin, but then the studio allowed him carte blanche to spend, umpty tens of millions of dollars making this pirate epic. And like I say, it's absolutely gorgeous, and the cast is wonderful and everything else. The biggest problem with it is its plot is so damn tired. It's so tired. They're looking for pieces of a treasure map. You're probably already falling asleep. Looking for pieces of a treasure map, and they're here, they're there, and the good guys have to find it before the bad guys, and they have to figure out what the map means. Oh my God, they couldn't come up with something new, something better? I mean, the treasure map story has been done to death in movies and cartoons and everything else. I mean, Treasure Island did it better. You're not going to top Treasure Island. Mix it up a little bit. Make it about a treasure hunt, but not about a treasure hunt. I mean, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is about a treasure hunt, but is it? No, it's not. It's really not about a treasure hunt. Most of that movie does not concern itself with the treasure hunt. It concerns itself with three rat bastards all trying to screw each other out of the treasure over the course of 3 hours. And, and the shifting loyalties and fantastic action set pieces make it wonderful. Maybe Rennie should have watched Good, the Bad, and the Ugly before he made Cutthroat Island. And but that's really the last big time pirate movie. I can't think of any other pirate movies since then are really worth talking about. Crenshaw Fowl. Maybe it's FAO Crenshaw. It's a small chain of toy stores in the Midwest. Hiya, Chuck. In episode 152, you were discussing the variability of costumes for certain heroes. How much input does a writer have when it comes to the costumes and fashion design of the characters in a comic? Well, if I feel it's of interest, I will describe. I did this initial drawing of Firefly when Graham and I rebooted Firefly, and I had a definite idea of how I wanted him to look. And I did this, rough little sketch, which, Graham pretty much followed. Graham made improvements. Obviously, Graham turned Firefly into a really cool looking character based off of, this sketch. So that's why he draws comics and I don't. So, and particularly on G.I. Joe, I did a lot of stuff, a lot of like rough sketches of different outfits and things like that for the different characters, because the G.I. Joe characters, they're military, and they'll, like our military or any military in the world, they suit up differently depending on where they're going to go. If they're going to be in the desert or a polar region or the jungle or under the water, obviously they're not going to wear the same clothes all the time. And I would, make drawings and sketch stuff, with costuming, backgrounds, gadgets, weapons, and vehicles and things like that. And I remember back when I did Punisher War Journal, I believe I did a rough sketch of real rough sketch of the Punisher's exoskeleton, the one that Microchip builds for Frank Castle, that doesn't really work terribly well, which was the joke. And I think I did a drawing of that, but I've done a lot of that stuff, just sketching stuff up. And I'm always interested in changing up costumes because, as loyal listeners to this channel know, my favorite Batman story of all time is Strange Costumes of the Batman, in which we get to see all the different various Batman costumes that he created for specific tasks. Creeper Weirdo asks, I kind of want to get into Wally Wood stuff. Where do I start? You can't go wrong start with the EC stuff. And it's all readily available. Maybe you don't want to buy the big hardcovers from Dark Horse, but you go on eBay and there were a lot of like reprinted comics or reprinted comic collections that are on eBay that I imagine are pretty affordable. They shouldn't cost that much, and it's not easy. And there's a lot of collections of Wally Wood stuff from EC dedicated just to Wally Wood. I think Fantagraphics did a number of them. But you just simply can't go wrong. He worked in every genre that EC published at the time, but of course the greatest mark he made was on science fiction genre. We're still, I put Wood up with Kirby and Ditko for creating comic book imagery, unique comic book imagery that didn't exist before they came along. And Wally Wood's science fiction imagery, even though science fiction magazines have been around for decades before Wally Wood shows up on the scene, Wally Wood's science fiction imagery is still the standard today. The big-eyed monsters and vehicles and the way the characters dress and all the rest of it, very influential. He was very influential on Al Williamson and guys like that. In turn, really influential on things like Star Wars with his lived-in look of his spacecraft and his spacemen. Up till this point, spacemen rode around in immaculate ships, free of wear or dust or anything else, and no real practical considerations for their costuming and things like that. But Wally made the stuff look believable and lived in and used. And that was really a new thing. And from alien creatures to alien landscapes and things like that, Wood created so much of the stuff that we simply take for granted now as symbolic of things that are either futuristic or interplanetary. And then it's just marvelous work in the war genre. And of course, Mad Magazine. Wally was one of the, along with Will Elder and Jack Davis, were, doing incredible work in Mad Magazine. And Wally stayed with Mad Magazine longer than some of those guys. He stayed all the way into the early 60s. And Mad was selling so big that they were able to pay like the same rates that illustrations for magazines were paying, like Saturday Evening Post and Ladies' Home Journal. These magazines used to be heavily illustrated by some of the top illustrators in the world. And Mad was able to pay rates close to what those rates were. And so guys like Wally Wood just took advantage of that and did lots and lots of extremely rococo, super detailed, double page spreads and everything else. Wood did some amazing art. They don't reprint a lot of this stuff. I recently bought a run of Mad that includes most of Wood's output on the black and white Mad magazine at this time because it left an indelible impression on me when I was a kid. I didn't own the magazines. I borrowed them from one of my sister's boyfriends. And just amazing work he would do with wash and craft tint and everything else. Wally was a professional artist, and if you paid him enough, you would get primo Wally. But even Phone It In Wally was better than a lot of stuff. Second to his stuff at EC is his work at Warren. Some of these stories, unless they're written by Archie Goodwin, are kind of forgettable, but the eye candy is there. And of course, Warren was paying the highest page rates for comics at the time. And so, again, Wally went to town. He was paid commensurate to his talents, and he worked on Creepy, Eerie, Vampirella, and Blazing Combat. He did 2 awesome stories for Blazing Combat, one about Nazi German jets, the German jet fighter, and another about the Battle of Britain. But there's a lot of Wally out there. If you look, once you start looking into Wally, you'll find, man, this guy was prolific in advertising and everything else. And of course, I have a nostalgic soft spot for Dynamo and the Thunder Agents, characters created by Wally Wood and Dan Atkins and Steve Ditko and Gil Kane, people like that, for Tower Comics. And it's kind of a nostalgia thing because, the stories aren't that great. I loved them when I was a kid, but rereading them, they're very, very simplistic superhero stories with gorgeous artwork. But to get them just to take a look at is worth it. If you get into Wood, and trust me, once you get into Wally Wood, you're never going to get enough. And there's a lot of hardcover collections of like Wood's drawings for Galaxy magazine and collections of public domain comics he did. Boy, what's the company? I can't remember the name of the company that they do a lot of these collections of. They restore the color comics to better than they ever looked before, and they have quite a few Wally Wood collections. And I can't. Boy, I know the publisher. He's going to kill me. I can't remember the name of him. But anyway, go on Amazon. Look up Wally Wood. They'll all pop up. Hey, did you ever want to get into comics? Writing, drawing, lettering, God forbid editing. Go to Discord. Look for spinrack.io. It's important. You need the .io. Spinrack.io at Discord. Graham Nolan and I are sitting there waiting. We're like teachers sitting in an empty classroom. There's a few people have shown up. More are starting. Some of you listened to me and actually went over there. It's nice to know some of you are actually listening to me. So Discord, you go to the spinrack.io community. There's a whole bunch of categories. There's no guidelines or anything else. Just come on and start talking. If you want to show us your art, show us your chops, show us what you got. There's some tryout stories. There's stories specifically written as tryout stories that you can fool around with. And we've had some really decent submissions. Some very talented people show up. But we'd like to see more of you there. Okay? So Discord, spinrack.io. And remember, BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, pictures of your doggies, pictures of your kitty cat, whatever, send them along to BrunoBookstore@gmail.com and I will absolutely see them. Okay? And while I still got you, if you're still here, First Kill graphic novel is still available. Head on over to, I guess it's Kickstarter. Anyway, I'll put it. I really should pay more attention to my own life. I will put it in the links and in the comments. And we're still going strong here. This is an old picture. I think we've raised quite a bit more money than this so far. And it's Rambo. It's Rambo's first tour in Vietnam, authorized by Sly Stallone himself. And it's a straight up war movie, lots of action, and we got a Dale Keown cover coming, which I really want to show you, but Richard Meyer won't give me permission yet. So maybe next week I'll let you take a peek at the Dale Keown cover for First Kill graphic novel. I probably wasn't even supposed to say anything about it. Oops. So I'm still not going to tell you who's drawing Alpha Core. That's up to Eric. Okay. Hey, I want to thank you for listening, watching, liking, subscribing if you have. If you haven't, please do help me out. Spread the word. We're growing this community, and it only takes a few hundred more of you to grow it quite a bit more and make it basically worth my while to keep doing these. I'm having fun. I like talking to you. I like or talking at you like we're having a conversation. You're just sitting in your car, sitting in your office going, when's this guy going to stop? So, I really enjoy doing this, but it takes time to put these videos together the way I like them. So I don't know how you like them, but I like the way they look. I like the feel, sort of homey, slap together videos that I put here, but it does still take time to put them together, and it would be nice if more people saw them. So that's it for me. Thank you, and I'll see you down the road.